The Battle of Kursk. This was a battle fought between July 5th and August 23rd, 1943, and was one of the largest and most decisive engagements on the Eastern Front during World War II. This battle not only marked a turning point in the war, but also showcased the shifting dynamics between the Axis powers and the Soviet Union. By the summer of 1943, Nazi Germany had suffered significant setbacks on the Eastern Front. The defeat at Stalingrad in early 1943, combined with the encirclement of the German Sixth Army, had crippled the Wehrmacht's ability to obtain its previous offensive momentum. The Soviet Union, having recovered from its losses, began to push the Germans back. This shift in the balance of power prompted Adolf Hitler to plan a decisive counteroffensive in the summer of 1943 to halt the Soviet advance. The Germans' objective was to strike at Kursk, a city located in central Russia, where the Soviet forces had built up an extensive defensive network. Kursk's location was strategically important, as it was a key to the crossroads of the German supply lines and a vital point on the Soviets' defensive line. Hitler believed that a successful offensive in this area would stunt the Soviet offensive and buy time for Germany to regroup and reorganize. The battle was largely a result of a German operation called Operation Citadel, which aimed to encircle and destroy the Soviet forces in the Kursk salient, a bulge in the Soviet front line. The Soviets, however, were prepared for the German attack, having received intelligence about it and built an extensive series of defensive fortifications against the Germans. Major figures of the battle. Several important military leaders played crucial roles in the Battle of Kursk. On the German side, the key figure was Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, who commanded Army Group South and was tasked with leading the offensive. Manstein was one of Germany's most experienced commanders and had a reputation for his tactical brilliance. However, despite his leadership, the operation ultimately failed because of a combination of strategic miscalculations and the strength of the Soviet Army's defense. The German forces also relied on General Hermann Hoth, who commanded the 4th Panzer Army, and General Walter Model, who led the 9th Army. Both these commanders were integral key parts to the assault on Kursk, but they faced significant challenges from the well-prepared Soviet defense. On the Soviet side, Marshal Georgy Zhukov emerged as a central figure in the defense of the Soviets of Kursk. Zhukov, who had played a pivotal role in the victory of Stalingrad, was appointed to oversee the Soviet defense and was instrumental in organizing the vast network of trenches, minefields, and anti-tank obstacles that would prove crucial in repelling the German assault. Zhukov's foresight and ability to coordinate the Soviet defense made the difference between a Soviet disaster and historic victory for them. Another important Soviet leader was General Konstantin Rokossovsky, who commanded the Soviet Central Front. Rokossovsky's forces, along with those under Zhukov's command, were crucial in the counteroffensive that followed the initial German attack. Significance of the battle. The Battle of Kursk was significant for several reasons. First and foremost, it marked the end of Germany's offensive capabilities on the Eastern Front. Operation Citadel was the last major German offensive in the East, and its failure decisively shifted the momentum of the war in favor of the Soviets. The German forces were forced into a defensive position for the rest of the war, and the Soviet Union gained the upper hand against Germany. Kursk was also significant because it was one of the largest tank battles in history. The battle saw the Germans field some of their most advanced tank designs, including the Tiger I and Panther tanks, while the Soviets deployed large numbers of T-34 tanks. The scale of the armored confrontation at Kursk demonstrated the importance of tanks and mechanized warfare in World War II. The failure of the German offensive also had strategic consequences. It allowed the Soviet Union to regain key territories in Ukraine and southern Russia, setting the stage for further Soviet offensives that would push the German forces back west. The battle also relieved pressure on the Soviet Union's vital industrial heartland in the east, where production was critical to continuing their war effort. Unique features of the battle. One of the unique features of the Battle of Kursk was the extensive use of defensive tactics by the Soviets. Unlike the previous battles where the Soviet Union had been on the defensive, at Kursk, the Soviets used their knowledge of the terrain to approach the German assault to create a layered defensive system. This included the use of minefields, anti-tank ditches, fortified positions, and strategically placed artillery. Another distinctive aspect of the battle was the role of intelligence. The Soviet Union was aware of Germany's plans in advance, largely due to successful espionage and the decoding of German communications. This early warning allowed the Soviets to prepare their defenses and straighten their positions before the German attack even began. In contrast, the Germans were caught off guard by the strength and depth of the Soviet defense, not knowing that they knew of the attack. The Battle of Kursk was also a battle of attrition. The Germans, despite having much superior tanks, were unable to break through the Soviet defenses. Over time, the German forces became exhausted, while the Soviets were able to replenish their troops and materials, eventually launching a successful counteroffensive against the Germans. Some interesting facts. The Battle of Kursk was one of the largest tank battles in history. It is estimated that over 6,000 tanks were involved in the battle, including 2,000 German tanks and 5,000 Soviet tanks. The Soviets used a defense-in-depth strategy, which included multiple layers of defenses, such as minefield, trenches, and anti-tank guns. This had made it extremely difficult for the Germans to achieve a breakthrough. The German plan for Operation Citadel was delayed several times, largely due to concerns over the weather and the condition of the German forces. By the time the attack was launched, the Soviets had already been prepared for the Germans. The Luftwaffe was heavily involved in the battle, but the Soviet Union's air defense was much too strong for the Germans. They struggled to maintain air superiority, which destroyed their ground operations and halted them severely. The battle saw the introduction of the T-34 and T-85 tanks, a new version of the Soviet T-34 tank. These tanks had a more powerful 85mm gun, which gave it an edge over the German tanks in some situations. Conclusion: the Battle of Kursk was a pivotal moment in World War II, marking the end of Germany's ability to launch large-scale offenses on the Eastern Front and signaling the beginning of a Soviet resurgence. The battle showcased the importance of defensive preparation, intelligence, and the strategic use of tanks in the modern warfare of World War II. Ultimately, Kursk was not just a military victory for the Russians, it was also a turning point that eventually led to the defeat of Nazi Germany. The lessons learned at Kursk shaped the remainder of the war on the Eastern Front and contributed to the liberation of Eastern Europe from German occupation.